Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lieutenant General Bob Wood, Executive Vice President, AFCEA International, to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to see a great crowd, and I hope you enjoyed lunch. This is going to be then our final presentation today on our topic of leveraging technology, the joint imperative. And I think we've walked our way through a variety of speakers, panels, and experts who've given us a good wide range of that joint partnership that goes on between industry, government, and the military. And in particular, it's important, I think, now to capture an operational perspective. An operational perspective very much engaged in the day-to-day, but really with an eye towards the future and the requirements in the future. To do that, we're honored to have Vice Admiral Mark Fox with us today. Admiral Fox is a veteran of many missions in Central Command, in fact, commanding 5th Fleet, and he's perfectly placed right now as a Deputy Commander at USCENTCOM, and can provide us some very interesting, I think, perspectives about the world as he sees it and the mission as he executes it in a rather complex part of the world, as we all would understand. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome a great naval aviator and leader to the stage and ask you to welcome Admiral Fox, please.
Well, good afternoon. I'm kind of humbled to be here as a digital immigrant, to be facing and addressing such a distinguished group of industry and people who are much smarter about networks and communications and so forth than I am. But I'm an operator and a practical, functional user. I especially appreciate Bob Wood reaching out and giving me a chance to be here. And I would also salute the team the team of teams, really, that's responsible for creating this venue. You know, the local AFCEA Pelican chapter, President Colonel Russ Smith, and Mr. Mark Christensen, and local chapter volunteers, thank you. And to Bob Shea, Bob Wood, the AFCEA International crowd, Mike Warlick, thank you. These are remarkable times. Think about this for a minute. In our lifetime, we have seen the greatest increase in prosperity in human history. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but one of the prime reasons is the increased speed, ease of connectivity, accuracy, volume of information technologies and communication. I'll give you one small example back from my junior officer days. I was on USS America in 1982. This was after the Iranian hostage crisis had completed. This was, so we're in the Indian Ocean, and we pulled into Colombo, Sri Lanka. And as a lieutenant in the squadron, I made a call, went ashore, and made a call back to my wife. And she was in Florida. The call cost more than any lieutenant could pay. I mean, something like $150 to make a phone call. And today, with absolutely no effort whatsoever, now I'm not trying to date myself too much here, but I am trying to illustrate the point that this has continued to improve and increase, and it's contributed greatly to our quality of life. I mean, we have children now who don't know what it's like to not be connected or on the web. We have majors and lieutenant commanders who have never not known direct connectivity back to their headquarters. So it's a remarkable time, but you know what? The very people that would wish us ill also have access to this technology. And so it can be used in a negative way. This sword cuts both ways. It's improved our quality of life, but it's also something that we've got to deal with the people who would wish us ill. And we've seen a sea change in terms of how information technology has been developed and introduced, and it's really important to see a crowd like this come together where you have industry, you have government, you have academia, you have R&D. This is the kind of petri dish that I think is really important, because as we go forward, you know, in my career, we've gone from DoD was the leading investor, the one who would develop technologies, and things were coming along because of what DoD's investments created. And that's, in my lifetime, in my career, it's turned around where DoD is a lagger in terms of we're really pacing ourselves along the way that private industry and academia in terms of development of many of these technologies. As was mentioned in my introduction, I was the commander of the 5th Fleet a few years ago, and I was struck by, I had a network that supported me when I was in Bahrain. It's called OneNet, and it was an administrative network, and yet I was using it for warfighting needs. So as a guy who's been a fleet commander and now as the deputy commander at Central Command, I look at our networks and our connectivity not in any administrative way at all. It's a weapon system. And we need to think of our communications and our ability to network and to be plugged in the right place as a weapon system. It is not administrative whatsoever. And let's face it, for those of you in the military, you're familiar with the term Phase 0, which is peacetime normal operations. And then you have other phases that will continue to grow in levels of crisis or into conflict. Well, in Phase 0, you're supposed to be just kind of in normal peacetime operations. Well, we're not in Phase 0 in the cyber world. You know very well that there are opponents out there that are trying to steal our secrets, they're penetrating our networks, and because this is a new area, it's a place where we still really haven't come to grips with how we're going to either punish people who do that. I just got a notice, by the way, that I was one of the people that was hacked, my social security number and all my personal data. My wife and I both got these little letters from OPM saying, hey, we're going to give you 3 years of free something or other, and it's like, made me feel really great. So it's the world that we live in, and it's an area of active competition and potential conflict, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to protect our networks, keep them operational even when somebody's trying to take them down. We've got to create a seamless ability to integrate and to share information with a whole diverse group of coalition partners. Now, our J6 team at Central Command, led by this gentleman right over here, Pete Gallagher, they're magicians. We are connected. We do incredible things. We're around the globe. But I'll tell you what, we have got to move on where instead of building the one-ofs or the eaches of, well, we're going to build a network for just this one purpose or for this one group, when you try to stitch together a coalition, each time you build a coalition, you don't want to have to build a new network. And I'll depart from my prepared comments for just a second because I want to talk a little bit about how important it is that we have this coalition in the fight that we're in. Our center of gravity is our ability in civilization to be able to push back those people who want to take us back to the 7th century. And we, the people who believe in living in the 21st century and taking advantage of all of the things that have been created, we need to be able to partner with our coalition partners in a way that's seamless, and they can communicate with us, we can communicate with them. We do it, but there's an enormous amount of touch labor and high torque effort. I'm using non-electronic terms here, but it's a high torque effort, I'll put it that way, to get a lot of this stuff done. So CENTCOM's #1 priority is an effective mission command platform. We need rapid, secure coalition connectivity. We are in a fight with a coalition. We will fight in the future with our coalition partners. And this is beyond just joint. I'll talk a little bit about just within the DoD. We've had our own issues figuring out how to do that. But our current capabilities fall short that result in operations in a multitude of different places having to stitch together networks that aren't not very flexible or not very interoperable. Individual, single mission capable networks take time and money that we don't have. So I'll give you one example. To create this culture of integration in 2010, Centrix ISAF is the International Security Force in Afghanistan. It was the U.S. mission network contribution to the Afghanistan mission network. The next step that we took was to have the CENTCOM partner network to fulfill the continued need for these Afghanistan mission network-like capabilities. And then we move into the joint information environment and mission partner environment, and they have to address the same need as we deal with the Department of Defense's change, as we have new operations and maintain the networks as they're coming into play. We've got to converge intel and operational information sharing requirements through a trusted network environment that will allow connection from SIPRNet to a variety of bilateral and multilateral partners at the secret releasable level. There are no programmed backups in theater amongst the services or our coalition partners. When I was 5th Fleet, I, as the naval component for General Mattis, couldn't help out my Army or my Air Force brothers and sisters in terms of if they had a casualty, I couldn't back them up, or if I had a casualty, they couldn't back me up. So from a DoD perspective, I need to have the resilience and the redundancy to be able to function, whether it's somebody dragging an anchor in a harbor in Alexandria, Egypt, that cut fiber once upon a time, or whether it's an actual attack with kinetic activity or from cyber. And that we need to move rapidly from a net-centric model to a data-centric model, to employ virtual data centers to create operational and tactical communities of interest. The bottom line, we've got to be able to get the right information to the right person in the right place at the right time. One of the things that has developed over the last probably 12 or 15 years is we in the tactical aviation world would have a targeting pod. And so we're trying to figure out how we're going to support the people on the ground. And the guys on the ground needed to see what I could see on my targeting pod. And so some enterprising junior officers came along. They came up with a thing called Rover, and they created the ability now for the ground forces that we were supporting to be able to now see what I was seeing in the cockpit. And you can now do the John Madden things like, no, not that building, this building. Well, that was a Band-Aid. It was it was one of the things I've just been talking about. So we need to, from a military perspective and from an operational imperative, we've got to be able to get this full motion video to a lonely soldier on a ridgeline in the Hindu Kush or in al-Assad, Iraq. We need to be able to do that seamlessly, or we need to have it on a ship that's over the horizon, and they need to know what's coming at them. So these are real examples. You know, when I was growing up in the world of tactical aviation, I flew F-18s, And when you're flying out on an air-to-air mission, you'll set up your radar so that you're looking in one particular area and your wingman looks in another. And so we would have these conversations about talking to each other about what you saw on your screens, because you need to make sure that you've covered all of the airspace a certain distance away from you. And so we're yakking to each other over the radio saying, this is what I see, and well, this is what I see, and then you're making these kinds of decisions based on what you're hearing. Well, we've come a long way since then. We are now to the point where we're able to share networked information, and you're able to now see what your wingman can see, so you don't have to have these yakety-yak conversations about, what am I doing? And I'm speaking this is kind of ancient history, I know, to a lot of people. Some people in here may not have even been born when Desert Storm came along, but I'll give you another example, by the way, and this is a real-world, heartfelt one, and that is the Air Tasking Order is the way that the Air Force organizes who goes where, who drops bombs, who gets gas where the tankers go. And so I was on USS Saratoga in 1990 and 91 for Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and we in the Navy had never had anything like this before. So we were kind of not excited about it, except for the fact that the only way to get gas is to read the Air Tasking Order. And so we became very focused on that, and so this is no kidding. This is not a fairy tale. This is true. We would fly an airplane, an S-3 Viking, into Riyadh to the Air Operations Center and pick up a disc, and they would bring the disc. They'd actually get 2 discs, and they'd fly back to Saratoga, and then we put 1 disc on a helicopter to take it over to Kennedy, and then we would take the one that we got. This was every day for tomorrow's Air Tasking Order, and then we would print this thing out, and it was about probably a New York City phone book's thickness, and it was your job now to go through this thing and figure out where you're going to meet the tanker, how much gas is he going to get, what bombs are you going to carry. It was a very labor touch intensive. Well, flash forward to 2003, I was Air Wing Commander on USS Constellation for the campaign that opened the liberation of Iraq, and this time now we are on SIPRNet, and I'm the guy that's the strike lead to put together all of this stuff. And so now I've got people that are at Whiteman Air Force Base, and I've got French, and I've got English, and I've got U.S. Navy, I've got Air Force. And this all came together in a much more seamless way just in a matter of a few years. So we are making great strides, but as soon as you've made a stride, the world that we live in is accelerating. So if you ever stop to pat yourself on the back, you're going to get run over by the train that's about to come behind you. So we've got to keep moving at an accelerating pace. We've got to continue to think about how do we make this work. The things that drive me nuts are we've worked on something for a long time, and then I discovered, well, these 2 systems don't talk to each other. I mean, there are just some things that just are enough to drive you to drink, independent of working at CENTCOM. What do we need from industry, and what do we need from academia? Nobody does this by themselves. This environment is such that no single sector, no single entity can do it by themselves. So our way ahead has to address government, industry, the private sector, academia, international partners. And so where you're trying to build great teams are built on trust. And then you see things that destroy trust, or your information is not assured, and then you find yourself back at a place where it's worse than when you first started. So we've got to have very high standards of security, very high standards of connectivity, and a level of cooperation across sectors, but it's fragile and it's very easily destroyed. So this business takes a lot of time and effort, and it's not just people on computers, but it's, staffs don't do things, people do things. And so this means that you've got to, for those of you in industry who are probably, I hope I haven't used any huge acronyms today, because left to our own devices in the Department of Defense, we will just lapse mindlessly into this acronym speak of Swahili that most people don't understand what we're talking about. So it's our job to make sure that we transmit what we're needing from you in ways that are coherent and understandable. And at the same time, I need what you have in industry and in academia to come forward and help us accomplish the mission that I've just described. I've deviated somewhat from my notes here, but you got a couple of C stories in there. So the private sector partnership that will ensure the civilian and military cybersecurity workforce that is able to address the current and emerging cyber challenges. One good example I can point to of a partnership with academia is the University of South Florida. Anybody here from USF? Any Bulls out there? Nope. Okay. They're going up to Annapolis this weekend to play football, and I hope they come back bruised. But anyway, they're working with central commands and working on a cyber workforce, offering a Doctor of Business Administration and Executive MBA and a Master of Science in Cybersecurity programs. So there's a good example. USF is very heavily involved with us at CENTCOM here in the Tampa, St. Pete area. So let me kind of wrap up, and I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. And if they're really, really hard ones, I'm going to just kind of, bunt them over here to Pete Gallagher. But we got to move forward. We've got to figure out a way to stay ahead of the threat, and we've got to make the things that we have in our own midst to make them work better. And here we are. There's a famous quote, I think it's a Winston Churchill quote, says, "Gentlemen, we're out of money. We're going to have to think." So now DOD is down to its last $600 billion in the next budget cycle. So it's not that we're broke, but we've got to be wise with how we spend the money that you, the taxpayers, provide us in DOD to do our job. And so I don't want to pay for something twice. I know that there are needs and reasons for people to have proprietary software or proprietary interests here, but from a military perspective, I need it to work, and I don't want to pay for it twice. So we got to figure out how we're going to do that. There's a technical piece. There's a cultural piece. I don't know if you all, it's in the open source, I think I can probably talk about this, how, the Joint Staff, their unclassified network was just taken offline for a good long period of time because somebody was clicking on the wrong, some sort of a spearfish, something or other. And I was talking to the director of the Joint Staff afterwards, and they had found the culprits, and he said that they would be executed the next day at dawn. But we have a cultural thing that we've got to be smart enough to be able to avoid having that kind of stuff shut us down. And oh, by the way, we in the military depend very greatly on unclassified networks as well. We depend on it for logistics and for medical support and all that sort of thing. So we've got our secret internet, the SIPRnet as we call it, but we are very dependent on secure unclassified networks as well. And finally, there's the cultural, there's the organizational piece as well. So a good friend of mine, Mike Rogers, he's the Cyber Command Commander, and he's also the commander of NSA. And this is one of these places now where I kind of view this time in a similar way as the 20s and 30s. And it's not that I'm predicting a big world war or anything coming, but all kinds of new technologies coming along. Well, think about the 20s and 30s. Airplanes, they were still trying to figure out how they're going to really use them. And then submarines, and then amphibious ships and logistics. How do you do that? And so there was a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of failure. So we in the military, we've got these new technologies that are coming on, and we're applying them to a wide spectrum of our missions. And it's like, wow, it's really great. And then you go, well, but it's vulnerable because now I didn't do the due diligence when we brought this thing online. So this is a journey. It's not a destination. We're going to have to work on this together. But I do appreciate the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you. I'll answer any questions that you have, or if we need to, I'll shift to sea stories, and I promise not to overstress my watch or shoot anybody down without any, there will be no fratricide here to the front row. So if you got any questions, please give me a shout.
Sir, first question. Do you see the coalition forces in the Far East becoming more cohesive, effective, and trusting of U.S. forces in the fight to suppress ISIS?
That's a great question. I think I would answer it this way. The Middle East is not culturally a place where trust is a very high cultural factor. And so one of the things that we want to do at Central Command is to find a way to build the partners' capacity in the region so that they'll have an ability to do things themselves as opposed to have us come over there and do it for them. So if you just look today, you'd say they're not very far down that path. But if you go back, well, 25 years ago right now, anybody remember? It was Desert Shield. Saddam had invaded Iraq in August of 1990, and we wound up going in to liberate Kuwait in January, February of 1991. So I'll just use 25 years as a benchmark. The Middle East, the culture of trust was completely absent. I mean, you had neighbors invading each other. So today, look around, and when I was 5th Fleet Commander, I had the Combined Maritime Force, 27 different nations, all at sea, operating together, doing a mission against counter-piracy. I could never have, in my wildest dreams, conjured up a scenario where suddenly I found a place where we've got all these different nations volunteering to work together to deal with the scourge of piracy. So the way nations work is they have national interests, and where national interests overlap with other nations' national interests, it's a Venn diagram, then you find the places where your national interests overlap with your partners, and then if there are a bunch of people with their overlapping interests, then you build a coalition on the place where people are able to come together and say, these are my national interests. That's one of the reasons that Syria is such a problem right now, is because there are so divergent, all of the different nations that are looking at how to try to deal with Syria are viewing it from their own perspective, and we don't have a whole lot of overlap. The only place that we all agree on is that ISIS is bad and we should be aligned against ISIS. But in the same breath, we know for a fact that the Russians don't have the same priority. They want to support the Bashar al-Assad regime, as do the Iranians, as opposed to us saying Assad's been a large part of the problem and the reason that they have a civil war in Syria. So the answer to your question is they've come a long way in 25 years, but it's a generational problem, and they're not where they need to be. One of these days, the Gulf Cooperation Council, there is a kind of a notion that we're going to create a collective security construct in the Middle East that will be NATO-like. In the GCC, they're taking some embryonic steps in that direction. But for example, what are the things that would be the most likely or the best things for them to interoperate with? It'd be ballistic missile defense, right? I mean, that's something that I made a trip to Riyadh this was in 2012, when Secretary Clinton was Secretary of State, and I gave an address to all of the GCC military, actually it was their ministerial, talking about the merits of sharing information in ballistic missile defense. Saying if you're a neighbor and you see a ballistic missile going here, you've got a much larger radar cross-section. You can see that better than the guy that may have it coming pointed right at him. So you share information and you've helped your neighbor defend himself. As I said, culturally, trust is not a high cultural value there, and it's going to take time. But you do see some steps that we're moving in that direction. Long-winded answer to a good question.
Thank you, sir. Next question.
Where are you? You sound like Jehovah here. Where's the... Oh, okay, good. All right. I just want to be able to look at the... Okay, go ahead.
How do you feel about operators interacting directly with researchers in their laboratories?
I'd love it. Although operators, they will just blurt out the truth. So you're going to have to wear a filter. No, I'm sorry, that was kind of a... I think it'd be a good thing. Direct input from the people that are actually in the field doing the job, I think is something that is really useful.
How important is encryption to your networks, and where do you think commercial encryption is adequate, and where is type 1 encryption required?
No. Now you're, okay, Pete, I'm going to probably, no. It's very important for this, it's in direct proportion to the importance of the information you're trying to protect, but even on an unclassified network, as I was just talking to you about the logistics or medical or a lot of the things that are on our current unclassified networks, we've got to be able to protect that. And then I'll flip this around and apply it to our enemy, because they're using encryption and they're using some pretty doggone tough things. So we're having to, this is a two-way street. We've got to crack their code and we've got to protect our own stuff. So, and the type 1 piece, I'll defer to my experts of where I really need to have type 1 encryption. But it's important. We need to know how to do it.
Are you gathering lessons learned in the complex missions underway, particularly in the air operations underway, and are solutions being developed for your key requirements in a predictable way?
Yeah, that if there's anything that we in the military do, we live on lessons learned. Let me give you one quick example of, I gave you the early example of the Desert Shield, Desert Storm air tasking order and how painful it was to get that out to Saratoga and to John F. Kennedy. Now, flashback to September of last year when President Obama came to Tampa, he came to MacDill and was briefed by our leadership, by General Austin, on our proposed campaign against ISIL. And so the President said, yep, I want to do that. This was a September 17th. It was a Wednesday. The President said, I want Arab partners to be part of this coalition, and I want them participating in our effort. And so we had 5 Arab partners operating with us in Syria on Monday night, the 22nd. That does not happen. We couldn't have done that with a Desert Storm ATO. And so the muscle memories that we've developed and the tactics and the ways of doing business that we've refined in business, we are a professional organization that do nothing but think of what did we learn, how do we apply this to the next mission, and how do we prepare for another unpredictable or uncertain time. So the short answer is, that's one thing I think is one of our great strengths, is that we grade ourselves very severely. We're in the business of life and death precision, and so we do go to school on our own mistakes. By the way, let me say something here. There are horrible tragedies that occur in war. We are the good guys in this fight. We are not the perfect guys. So when we make a mistake, we grade ourselves, we do an investigation, we take it seriously, and we fix whatever the problem was that made that mistake. So that's our culture, that's our ethic, and we are always the first ones to say if we made a mistake that we're going to correct it. And so this idea of the ethic of critical self-assessment is, I think, one of our strengths in the U.S. military.
Sir, General Shea, are you heading up to give him the hook? Admiral Fox, you mentioned that communication should be considered a weapons system. The defense industry has established processes to protect traditional weapons systems. What steps can industry and our partners take to protect the new communications weapons system?
I got to throw this one back to you guys because I know what I want, and I don't know how to get there. But I treat this business as a weapon system. It is very much as much a weapon system as an F-A-18, as an F-22, as a JDAM, as anything else. We've got to manage and think of it in those terms. We have not, in my opinion, done that. And that's one of the reasons that we've got the gaps and seams. So I'm going to throw that one back and say that's where one of the reasons I'm making the point is I need us to think about it that way. And when you think about it as a weapon system and not just its administrative function, it changes the way that you prioritize and the way that you view your function. So, well, I kept most people awake. I think there were a couple of people that probably had the big slug of chocolate cake there, but I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you. I hope it was useful for you. I appreciate this. Thank you.
So I want to thank Admiral Fox for sharing his time. There's a lot of other things he can be doing. Let's face it, the activities in his area of responsibility are pretty significant and they're very darn diverse. So I want to thank you for sharing your time and providing some valuable insights to our partners here today. So in honor of your participation, we're going to make a contribution to all the wounded warriors out there. Thank you very much for being here today, Mark.
That's a perfect way to say thanks.
And while he is up here, and to all the members and the uniformed members of the Central Command, Special Operations Command, JCSE, and all our service members and the contractors and our civilian employees who support them around the world, I'd ask you to never forget that feeling you had in your gut on 9/11 and make sure you continue to support the efforts of these men and women as they go out there and defend our way of life. So again, thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you.
Well, this is about to wrap this up now, so I would also, before we close up, I'd like to offer our sincere thanks to the following companies for their support of MILCOM: Aerospace Corporation, BAE Systems, Fortinet, GCE&E, Harris, LGS Innovations, Lockheed Martin, MITRE, Raytheon, SMS Data Products, and I'd like to recognize John Burns, Director of Business Development at BAE, who is with us this afternoon. So thank you all very much. Without your support, events like this, and this event in particular, just wouldn't take place. So again, thank you very much. We are at the conclusion of the program, so again, I'd sincerely like to thank everybody for attending. This really has been a great example of the interchange and the ethical exchange of ideas between industry, government, academia. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing that I think a few things that we ought to take away from today's event today is that we can deliver affordable technologies for the warfighter, and we can provide those that he needs for his success. And that's why we're here. Again, a couple of the takeaways that come to me is we used to talk joint, but really this is coalition now. And it's just not national coalitions. Interagency is involved as well as some of the other civilian activities that are out there. Resilience is key to what we're doing. And in the end, it's all about mission assurance, making sure that the people who are asked to go in harm's way and those who are supporting those in harm's way are able to perform the mission. And when you look at all the priorities that are out there, I think if you focus on what's important to the mission, you'll be getting it about right. Simplicity. When your head is down and rounds are coming in around you, you're looking for something that's simple. When you're trying to run the network, back in the Network Operations Center, simple is better. We don't need complex solutions. We've talked about machine to machine, and so the complexity has got to be lowered. And we're talking about interoperability for seamless operations, both from a coalition, interagency, and intergovernmental perspective. So those are all important issues, and those are some of the key takeaways that I got. So on behalf of the entire team here, AFCEA International, IEEE Communication Society, the AFCEA Tampa chapter, the Pelican chapter, we truly appreciate your support and your participation in this event. Again, as well as to our sponsors, and to those of you who are participated, contributed in the various ways that you are able to contribute, whether it's taking in information that you'll take back to make better capabilities for our warfighters. We truly do thank you very much for your participation. And from the feedback we received so far, I think it's safe to say that we can declare MILCOM 15 a success. But I would also offer to you that if you have ways and ideas on how to make it better, if we fell short in some area, please let us know where we fell short so that we can go back and assess it and try to make this better. We're a continuously learning organization, and we're not going to settle on our laurels. We're not going to be satisfied with the status quo. We want to make this event better and better so that the products and the capabilities that are delivered to the warfighters and those who support the warfighters are as good as they possibly can be. And we look forward to next year, and it's my pleasure to announce that MILCOM 2016 will return to Baltimore, and it'll be November 1st to November 3rd. The theme is Secure Communications at the Speed of Cyber, and I think we heard a lot about that today, so that's the topic that we'll be having and the theme we'll be having for next year's MILCOM. We've already issued the call for papers for next year, and you can find more details for that on the MILCOM website. And for those of you attending the final technical sessions, they begin at 2 p.m. Please, everyone, have safe travels, and we'll see you next year in Baltimore. Thank you very much for your participation and your support.